Everyone, and welcome. Did you know that your gut contains over 100 trillion bacteria? That's more than 10 times the number of cells in your entire body. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ask a Nurse Practitioner with nurse practitioner Deidre. Yeah, what an opener, right? A little cliffhanger there. Today, we are diving into a fascinating topic that might just make you see your digestive system in a whole new light. We often think about our heart and our gut as separate systems, but what if I told you they're more connected than you ever imagined? That's right. Today, we are exploring the incredible link between gut health and heart health. And trust me, it's a connection you do not want to ignore, right? NP Deidre?
Yes, your gut isn't just responsible for digesting that delicious food that you
Mhm.
had at dinner. It's a complex ecosystem that plays a crucial role in your overall health,
Yep.
including the well-being of your heart. So recent research has shown that the bacteria in your gut can influence everything from inflammation to cholesterol levels, both of which have a direct impact on your heart health. It's like your gut and heart are having a constant conversation,
I
and
love that.
we want to make sure it's a healthy one, right? But
Yep.
here's the exciting part. We have the power to influence this gut heart dialogue, and one of the most promising ways to do that is through probiotics. So these beneficial bacteria can help us to balance out your gut microbiome, potentially leading to improved heart health. And to talk more about that, let's welcome our guest for today, Kiera Siedman. She's a registered dietitian with health supplement company Pendulum. Welcome, Kiera. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's start with, can you explain what Akkermansia muciniphila is and why it's considered an important probiotic?
Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad you had to say that first versus me.
Yeah, part of the requirements of working in this industry is you have to learn how to pronounce everything, right? So Akkermansia muciniphila, this is really emerged. We've had so much research come out over the last 20 years, and Akkermansia has emerged as this what we call keystone species. And keystone species exist in really all ecosystems. But we've identified these key species within the microbiome that have an influential impact. So I like to think of keystone species as like the star player of a sports team, where if they're absent, then you start to really, it starts to impact the success of the team. So Akkermansia, being this sort of shining star of the microbiome, plays such an important role in maintaining the overall health of the microbiome. It's a really key microbe that improves the gut barrier and has a ton of health benefits when it comes to our metabolic health and our cardiovascular health as well.
Excellent. So, how does it support overall gut health, and why is gut health so crucial to cardiovascular health?
So this is what we really come to learn now when in regards to the research around the microbiome, that our microbiome is truly linked to just about every organ system, and our cardiovascular system being one. So you talked about that intimate conversation, or what we call the gut heart axis, that bidirectional communication. And one of the key components to having a healthy microbiome is actually what's called the mucosal barrier. And so our mucosal barrier, or our gut barrier, is basically the security perimeter that protects your microbiome from your immune system. And so it's like your fence. That's what we often call our mucosal barrier. And we all, I'm looking back at my fence, and it's protecting what's inside my fence from what's outside my fence. And so Akkermansia is unique. And so muciniphila actually translates to mucin loving. And so what Akkermansia does, it actually can consume the mucin, which are proteins within that mucosal or gut barrier, to help regenerate that gut barrier and to help build new mucus. And so it's basically a fortifier of that mucosal barrier, because what can happen is, as we lose these keystone species, or we start to lose diversity in our microbiome, or we lose the bacteria that produce really key components, what we call short chain fatty acids, then basically we have this breakdown in your mucosal barrier. Those fence posts are getting knocked out, And bacteria toxins, especially something called LPS, lipopolysaccharides, these are toxins that are contained on certain bacteria within your microbiome that if they get into systemic circulation, get into your bloodstream, they can start to drive inflammation. And this is one thing that's been linked to cardiovascular health. So Akkermansia is key in fortifying that gut barrier to protect your microbiome and to prevent bacteria and toxins from getting into your bloodstream.
That's amazing, amazing. So, what specific mechanism links Akkermansia to reducing inflammation, particularly in the peripheral arterial disease state? I know you mentioned the LPSs, lipopolysaccharides. We've touched a little bit on this in other episodes, but if you can dig into that a little bit for us, be great.
Absolutely. I love talking about LPSs because this is something that exists at normal low levels in a healthy microbiome. But what we start to see happen as we lose these important species, so as Akkermansia levels start to become diminished, and this can happen because of our diet, consuming foods like ultra processed foods, standard American diet, which we know impacts the microbiome and medications and chronic stress, all these things that I call microbiome disruptors. As we start to lose the integrity of the microbiome, we start to get this breakdown in the mucosal barrier. Akkermansia, we start to lose its abundance. So it's actually becoming almost a biomarker for mucosal health. But LPS is contained on what's called our gram-negative bacteria. Gram-negative makes up majority of the bacteria, but there are lots of gram-negative bacteria that are considered pathogens. And as we eat, bacteria die off and they release LPS. And then this is a normal process, but if we have this breakdown, if we have this poor mucosal barrier, my fence post is becoming knocked down, our security perimeter has been breached, well, now LPS can translocate or move into systemic circulation. And what LPS does is it binds to our immune cells, what we call our dendritic cells, our macrophages, and basically stimulates an immune response and activates immune complexes that produce pro-inflammatory cytokines. Cytokines like TNF alpha, if you've talked about, or interleukin 6. And this basically is a driver for low-grade chronic inflammation. And it's actually a term called metabolic endotoxemia. And this has actually been linked back to cardiovascular health, but even obesity and changes in our blood sugar, insulin resistance, and diabetes. And what we're finding in the research is it's all happening and really starting in the microbiome. So this breakdown, this poor mucosal barrier integrity, is essentially ground zero for so many of the chronic conditions that we face today. And so Akkermansia is so key because number one, it produces or it stimulates that mucin because it can consume old mucus. So it's essentially a regenerator of that mucosal barrier. But Akkermansia also produces short chain fatty acids. So it produces propionate, which we know is really important for cardiovascular health, but has profound effects throughout the body. And propionate helps to feed bacteria that produce butyrate. And butyrate is one of our most important short chain fatty acids. It's the primary fuel for our colonocytes. But butyrate actually binds to specific cells in our intestines that stimulate GLP-1. And the other cool thing with Akkermansia is that it produces a protein, what's called P9, and that actually binds to receptors in the intestinal L cells, different receptors that also stimulate GLP-1. And we know GLP-1, I mean, if you live in this world, we've all heard of GLP-1, and we think of it obviously for, weight and appetite regulation, helping with, food cravings and blood sugar regulation. But GLP-1 is also important for our cardiac health and helpful in reducing risk of cardiovascular disease.
So there's this growing evidence that gut health impacts heart health, and we're seeing that. Can you kind of break down how Akkermansia may help improve like blood lipid levels and reduce the plaque buildup in the arteries?
Absolutely. And so a lot of it goes back to, again, that mucosal barrier and this metabolic endotoxemia. So there have been studies done that look at LPS, again, because LPS, if there's a breakdown in that mucosal barrier, it can get into systemic circulation and basically travel to all parts of the body. And they've found in atherosclerosis and other cardiovascular conditions that there is evidence of LPS. So we see that direct correlation happening within the stemming from the microbiome, which is really interesting. And again, this is why I really view the microbiome as essentially the foundation, just like a foundation to our home. So Akkermansia, in particular, in regards to our lipid levels, because of its ability to break down mucin and because of its ability to release short chain fatty acids, that obviously has implications in being able to reduce blood lipid levels, which can be helpful with our cholesterol levels, which we know are all important in preventing that plaque buildup. But because Akkermansia is also this keystone species, it influences the gut environment. It also helps to influence the gut environment in a way that makes the GI environment less friendly to our pathogens. So we've got all different types of bacteria, and we're always working to create this balance. And because Akkermansia has all these, wonderful benefits, it's important for the gut barrier, but it also influences the other bacteria that are around. And we know that some of our more harmful bacteria, our pathogens, can produce other metabolites besides LPSs, other metabolites that we know are implicated in heart disease, things like TMAO or trimethyl amine oxide, which is a compound now that's actually being looked at as a biomarker for atherosclerosis and cardiovascular health. And so Akkermansia, because of its ability to really influence that GI environment, to help with the growth of other beneficial bacteria, with the help of fortifying that barrier, has a lot of benefits in how it directly impacts our heart health.
This is just such fascinating stuff that you're sharing with us. So I am really loving a little bit of the science behind this. But how does Akkermansia help strengthen the barrier and prevent issues like leaky gut? We've talked about leaky gut here on these episodes, which that's been associated with cardiovascular conditions. But how does it strengthen the gut barrier to prevent that leaky gut?
Yeah, it is so fascinating because these tiny microbes, like you mentioned, we're essentially more microbes than we are human, which is just like blows my mind, right? But we're finding that a lot of the bacteria, all the bacteria have these unique functions, and what really kind of clicked the interest, through all this advanced technology that we have now, and being able to really study the microbiome and study these strains, we've really honed in on these key functions. So one of the key functions that Akkermansia has is exactly what you just mentioned, which is this ability to fortify the gut barrier. And it's there's sort of three components to that mechanism of action. So for one, Akkermansia is unique in that it consumes that mucin. So by consuming mucin, which again is that protein, which is that sticky, slimy area that prevents, anything from getting or translocating into your immune system, Akkermansia feeds on that. And so by feeding on it, it actually stimulates new growth. So it's sort of constantly making sure that our fence is tight, that all those pieces are put in place, and that nothing is able to get through. But by doing that and by consuming mucin, we also get this production of short chain fatty acids. And we know our short chain fatty acids, and especially butyrate, help with promoting gut barrier health. But also Akkermansia produces another key protein. I had mentioned one, that P9, that we know produces and helps with your own body's production of GLP-1. But Akkermansia also produces a protein called A-muc1100. And this very specific protein binds to what's called our TLR2 receptors within our intestinal lining. And this interacts with our immune system. This helps to create immune balance, but that also helps to strengthen the gut lining. So there's almost this sort of trifold effect of how Akkermansia specifically strengthens the gut barrier.
Excellent. So, do you know if there's any clinical studies or emerging research that highlights Akkermansia's benefit for individuals with PAD or any other cardiovascular issues?
So like everything in the microbiome world, it's constantly emerging. I mean, if you look at like how many studies were done, even just 10 years ago, you get this perfect hockey stick increase. And there's always studies being done on Akkermansia. At Pendulum, we are so committed to the research. We're a company that's just full of scientists and dietitians and people who are really rooted in the science, which is really exciting to be a part of. And so we actually have a few specific studies going on that are looking at various health outcomes, But we have a specific study on using one of our products that contains Akkermansia, as well as a really prominent butyrate producer, Clostridium butyricum, as well as a bifidobacterium. This is one of our flagship products. And this is a two-phase study that's looking at various metabolic outcomes. So looking at GLP and peptide YY, insulin, looking at different inflammatory cytokines, looking at also food cravings and quality of life. So this will be really helpful because we know that all of these hormones that are produced within the microbiome, and of course, metabolic function, plays a key role in cardiovascular health. And then we also have another study that's in partnership with a provider, a doctor out of TCU, that's using one of our other formulations that contains the 5 strains that we manufacture at Pendulum, so including Akkermansia. And that's really looking at changes in body composition. So again, looking at body weight changes, fasting glucose, fasting insulin, A1C changes, which again may not directly be, specifically looking at, say, plaque, but we know that with heart disease, with diabetes, that these all come with increased risk of each other and vice versa. And so all of these really excited in terms of the entire, metabolic cascade.
Looking forward to the results of these studies.
Me
I
too.
can expect that they're going to be good. What role does Akkermansia play in regulating kind of metabolic functions such as insulin resistance, and how can this benefit our patients with cardiovascular?
So of course we know that with cardiovascular conditions that we often can see diabetes and vice versa. We know that people with diabetes are at what's the statistic, 2 to 4 times, likelihood of developing cardiovascular disease. So we know that it's important to help to optimize our metabolic function. So Akkermansia really, we talked a lot about the gut barrier benefits, but one of the other sort of shining, attributes of Akkermansia is its role in metabolic health. And so aside from obviously that fortification of the mucosal barrier, we talked a lot about that LPS. And I use this term metabolic endotoxemia, which is just basically this rise in inflammation and essentially the driver of low-grade chronic inflammation. And there's been studies done. In fact, there's a landmark study I love to always talk about because it was done back in 2007. So really kind of at the start of this whole microbiome boom and the Human Microbiome Project, but it was actually done by the American Diabetes Association that essentially looked at this very factor of metabolic endotoxemia and found that this is actually triggering the onset of obesity and insulin resistance. So really showing that the gut is truly that foundation. And so again, the gut barrier being key to that to prevent LPS, to prevent that marked rise in inflammation is key. But then I also mentioned too that Akkermansia has this unique ability to stimulate and help with your own body's production of GLP-1, which our body naturally produces. A lot of people don't even realize that our microbiome produces GLP-1. We just think of it as, these medications and everything we're hearing and seeing in the news. But this is so important because if we can optimize our own body's production of GLP-1, this has an effect not just on our heart health, but also an effect on reducing appetite, improving food cravings, helping to slow digestion, and of course, helping with blood sugar regulation. So by producing butyrate, right, we talked about Akkermansia producing propionate, which is a short chain fatty acid, and that helps to feed other bacteria to produce butyrate. Butyrate binds to receptors, what's called our G protein coupled receptors on our intestinal L cells. So these are within your intestinal layer, and that stimulates the release and production of GLP-1. But then Akkermansia also has this unique protein, another one. Again, all of our bacteria have all these very specific functions, but it has another protein called P9. And P9 binds to other receptors on our intestinal L cells that also stimulates the release and the production of GLP-1. And GLP-1, again, has implications not just in heart health, but also in blood sugar regulation and appetite control. So again, that gut barrier fortification to prevent that metabolic endotoxemia and that inflammation that ensues, but also these very key components that stimulate very important hormones and hormones our body produces that are major players and play a huge role in our blood sugar regulation. They've done a lot of studies in the past. There's so many studies that have been done on Akkermansia, and one of my favorite, I have 2 in particular that looked at Akkermansia specifically with obesity, and one found that in obese patients. So actually looking at a cohort of obese patients, that they found that those that had higher Akkermansia were actually more metabolically fit. So they actually had improved metabolic markers. And so it goes to show that, of course, we always want to lose weight, but our goal is to be healthier and to have healthier outcomes. So I thought that was really interesting that despite maybe BMI wise, people were still obese, they were actually metabolically stable with the higher Akkermansia levels. So I thought that was a pretty profound study. And so there's been other studies linking Akkermansia to changes in body weight and again, improved metabolic outcomes. And then we actually did a study on one of our formulations, which contains our 5 strains at Akkermansia. And this was a study that we did in type 2 diabetes. And after 90 days of taking one of our supplements called Pendulum Glucose Control, but after 90 days of taking it, we saw a 0.6 reduction in A1C. And that's huge. I mean, it's statistically significant, but it's also clinically meaningful. It's enough to take someone from being diabetic to pre-diabetic and pre-diabetic to even non-diabetic. We also saw a 33% reduction in glucose spikes. So, and again, no other changes, just really what does modulating or modifying the microbiome do to these metabolic outcomes? It's really exciting.
You already answered my next question. I was wondering, can Akkermansia supplementation help address these risk factors that many of our patients with PAD struggle with, like insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes? And it's sounding like yes, in your
Yeah.
studies.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to think about, the complexity, right? We can do all the right things. And I can even speak to this in my patient population where like I have people who are changing their diet and they're really trying to control all those modifiable risk factors and microbiome, just all the things we know that impact our health, but they're still not seeing the benefits or they're still not seeing the changes in their food cravings or the changes in their blood sugar levels. And that's why we have to start to consider and really think about the microbiome as being part of our intervention toolbox. And I think it just offers a really nice opportunity when we're doing all the other things to help to amplify the results and start to actually achieve the benefits of what we know, these amazing bacteria can do. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, supplementing with Akkermansia, we've seen, and we're conducting those studies even to show that taking a probiotic actually produces the results that we want to see. And I think that's important. I think, anyone who's, we shouldn't just like reach for the shelf and take any probiotic, because this is where we're getting into now with more personalized and individualized medicine, is really honing in on these specific characteristics and functions of what we know these bacteria to do to really help to achieve those benefits in our patients and our clients.
Well, you're definitely speaking my language when it comes to talking about the microbiome and, the ability to change things and change outcomes for chronic conditions and everything. I really think when we have to listen to our patients, right? When they come to us and they're doing all the right things, but nothing's changing the dial, we have to really take a step back and think, like, what's the root cause? Why wouldn't they be changing? And, the microbiome is huge in that. So it's really promising to hear all this about Akkermansia today.
Yeah.
Do you think, is there a connection between Akkermansia and nitric oxide production? Because we know it's essential for maintaining healthy blood vessels and circulation, but do they see any connection between the two?
So not necessarily a direct connection as far as like, oh, Akkermansia will increase nitric oxide, but because Akkermansia can help with reducing pro-inflammatory cytokines, so Akkermansia plays a key role in helping control inflammation and help control that inflammatory response, especially that inflammatory response that we see as a result of, again, those LPSs getting into systemic circulation and driving that low-grade chronic inflammation. So it's not producing nitric oxide directly, but it supports all of those key factors that optimize, our microbiome function, that optimize cardiovascular health, that we know can contribute to healthy nitric oxide levels. And again, that LPS preventing that LPS translocation, the production of short chain fatty acids, and again, the maintenance and the fortification of our gut barrier. There was a great study that came out a while ago that basically looked at, a breakdown in your mucosal barrier, poor gut barrier, is truly ground zero for most non-communicable diseases. And again, you mentioned that like we have to get to the root cause, and that's why we have to, it's not the only thing we have to think about in terms of our health being our microbiome, but it has to be part of that three-legged stool. And again, I use the analogy of a house. Like you can have the most perfect, beautiful house, and all of a sudden you get your inspection and you have cracks in your foundation. Well, is that house have the same worth to you, right? And now you have all these disruptors, hurricanes and bomb cyclones and all these things that we know that then can disrupt it more. So it's the same thing in our health. If we don't have a strong foundation, then our diet and our chronic stress and travel and all the things that we know can impact the microbiome, smoking, all of that, then again, we're just going to start to add fuel to the fire and start to break and create more problems.
It's a really good analogy to think of our health as our home. I like that you explained it that way. It really makes sense. So for our listeners who are interested in improving their gut health to support their cardiovascular wellness, is there a way they can naturally increase Akkermansia levels, or is supplementation a better option for them?
So I love this. And I think this is like, it can all kind of sound like doom and gloom, like, oh my goodness, I've got these cracks in my foundation. But the good news is we really can improve the health and the resiliency of our microbiome. And we know Akkermansia is key to that. Again, it's the star player of our sports team. So supplements are important because they offer the most direct way to receive the benefits and to start to get the benefits. But we can, again, by improving our lifestyle, improving our diet, especially the consumption of what we call prebiotics, which I'm sure you've talked about in the past. Prebiotics are foods that feed your good bacteria. And so these are your most fiber containing foods, which can often be very hard to get sufficient amounts of in the diet. We know there are certain food components called polyphenols, like your pomegranate and green tea extract and grapeseed extracts, and these specifically that feed Akkermansia. Akkermansia can consume them, and that's going to help to build the abundance. So I always say, as long we're supplementing, we're improving the diet, and that recipe together is often going to optimize your microbiome's ability to help grow and build that Akkermansia abundance.
Just great information, Kiera. I really appreciate you sharing this with us. And Kim, do you have any questions, or is there anything from our audience that we have here?
Oh, I would love to start. So we did have Heinz in our audience. This is amazing. Thank you so much. There was a lot of RD ABCs, registered dietitian ABCs. So I'll be looking a few words up later. But Heinz was mentioning in the chat here that, okay, so he has a great eating habit. So he doesn't maybe think that he needs to hear this information or be affected, although he's going to rewatch it later. So I'm just picking on him a little bit. But a lot of people, I'm sure you're smiling. You know what I'm going to say. Oh, I'm eating right. I'm fine. Yet I have cardiovascular disease and I have peripheral artery disease and maybe I have cancer, but oh, I'm eating right. So this doesn't affect me. What do you have to say? How can you refute that?
So I hear that often, and I think this is kind of the mystery and really the interesting piece to the microbiome world is that microbiome dysfunction or dysbiosis or a loss of these keystone species or a breakdown in your security perimeter can manifest beyond the microbiome. So changes to your sleep, changes to your skin, changes to your heart health, changes to that are all potentially factoring in. So maybe we have a really good diet, although even myself, I'm guilty sometimes, like where I think I have like this healthy diet. And then when I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't reach that 40 grams or 35 grams of fiber I should eat in a day. Or, oh, I only ate one meal a day today. So sometimes we have to be a little bit more investigative. But what are the other things in your life that could be impacting your microbiome? Are we sleeping great? Do we have stress? Now that's a loaded question. Like, I think we all have stress. Do we travel, right? Like they found travel. I have to travel for my job. Changes to our circadian rhythm, certain types of exercise. I was just speaking to a group of athletes. We know that elite athletes tend to have more microbiome dysfunction because high endurance and high intensity can actually create changes to your intestinal barrier, can break down your mucosal barrier. So diet's just one piece to the puzzle. But if we have cardiovascular disease, of course, genetics, of course, it's not as simple as A plus B equals C. But are there other things that could be disrupting the microbiome that we need to take into account? And that's where still, again, offering probiotics, doing other things that we know are supportive to the microbiome may be necessary to just improve those other health outcomes.
So we have a Zoom user, I can't see who that is, that if you want to unmute and ask Kiera your question, go ahead and unmute and ask Kiera your question, the one that just posted in chat. There's no name on it. So I just want to make sure you can go ahead and unmute. Or maybe not. I can read the question. Which probiotics do you recommend? There's so many out there that it's hard to choose. This person currently uses Floristore, but has been taking that since 2015 after an H. pylori infection.
So yeah, so I mean, there are lots of probiotics, and sometimes it is hard to break through the noise. So obviously, I work for Pendulum, and we manufacture what we call these next gen probiotics. So now that we are able to identify these very important strains, these anaerobic bacteria that live, in that distal, that far end of your colon, so again, Akkermansia, I think, is one of the most important. And I would say this even prior to joining Pendulum, because it's really come out as being this sort of, key player, this shining star of the microbiome. So I'd be, happy to leave our link there that you could check out the probiotics that we have. I think there's lots of different probiotics. I just encourage people to look at the company. What research are they putting out behind the products? Because there are lots of different bacteria, and they all have different functions. And so what are you trying to achieve in the probiotic that you're taking? And I do encourage, to really look at the company. What research do they put behind their products to show that their products are actually efficacious, meaning they're actually doing what they're supposed to do? I don't think there's a one size fits all protocol for probiotics where we can use different strains depending on what's going on. I love Akkermansia. I'm also a huge advocate of spore-based probiotics, which are unique in that they help to sort of influence the overall microbial ecosystem and landscape. I love Floristore. Actually, that Saccharomyces boulardii is a great probiotic that we know helps with antibiotic-associated diarrhea. It's important for combating yeast. It's really helpful when it comes to our immune system. So I think we can start to piece together, and I always encourage people to work with, a qualified healthcare practitioner who can help guide you along that. But again, for me, Akkermansia is a key one just because of that support to the gut barrier, of obviously the benefits that it has on your metabolic health as well.
Now, nurse practitioner Deidre over there is assuming I probably have a leaky gut. And so she sent me a stool test. Oh yeah, we're going there again. And
Yes.
and can I'm stalling. I'm procrastinating the whole thing. I'm procrastinating. And so I'm trying to get out of it, just telling you ahead of time in asking this question. So if I just went ahead and started some Akkermansia, could I possibly forego the stool test? Yeah. I see you looking down at nurse practitioner Deidre.
I love stool tests. So
yes,
I love stool testing because you just get a better baseline. You get to see, you can again individualize and personalize the approach so much better. Is it wrong to start probiotics? No, but don't you want to know what your baseline is to really see what could be driving some of that leaky gut? And
Okay, so there are different things that could be, but is there any con to just taking Akkermansia, and how long do you take it?
no, there's no harm. There's really no I mean, some people can, like any probiotic, when you start taking it, it can take, obviously a few weeks to start to work. Some people can feel some GI disturbance, which I always say is actually a really good thing because that means there's something actually changing. Because again, as you shift out that bad bacteria, you can sometimes feel that. But no, there's no harm to taking it. I encourage people, especially if you are doing stool testing, I encourage people to take it for at least 3 months. I mean, really 3 months in general for probiotics and any type of sort of microbiome modulation is key. But 3 to 6 months, you can always then, again, what else are you doing to help to encourage that Akkermansia prebiotics, resistant starches, your polyphenols, so all those wonderful fibrous foods that we can get in the diet to help see. But there's also no long-term risks of continuing to take it to make sure that you're like, for me, it's like an insurance policy. Like I will never not take probiotics, even though I try to consume a great diet. I do all these wonderful things in my life because I want to ensure that I am maintaining and supporting these very key components to a healthy microbiome.
So are you teaching and taking these, or you're teaching your body not to do it itself? That would be a concern.
No, no. I mean, it's not like where we hear of other things like, oh, if you keep taking it, your body's gonna like people say that even about enzymes and stuff, but no, absolutely. Again, your body's going to support its growth. And we showed this even in one of our clinical trials on our pendulum glucose control, that in a certain subset of those subjects that Akkermansia actually was able to establish itself. And we're doing more studies to look at that based on supplementing, how long does it take or how much does it take to really start to facilitate that own growth. But then keep in mind, you take Akkermansia or you take a probiotic, you take something and you feel better. Again, what are all the things around us that's potentially impacting our microbiome? Do then we just go back to where we were? So I always kind of think of it as like, what can I do that's beneficial, that's not necessarily causing me any problems? I'm going to also work on everything else, but I want to make sure I'm actually, gleaning those benefits.
Yeah, I was talking to one functional medicine practitioner, and she said that it's really important to kind of change out your probiotics once in a while and give them a switcheroo. Because I was taking hyperbiotics. I don't know if you've heard of hyperbiotics for vitamin C infiltration into the gut. I think it's the only one that's actually paired with vitamin C. It's vitamin C and echinacea, and I think one more thing that are paired with a probiotic, so it infiltrates. And it really helped me during the prevent COVID. So I still take that, and I don't really listen to not take it because if it's working, then I don't know, I'm continuing to take it. Can I take that with Akkermansia? They all work
Absolutely.
together.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, we're identifying so many different types of bacteria that have beneficial functions. And this is also goes back to even stool testing a little bit, is where you can start to figure out, well, I'm someone who's struggling with sleeping. I've got, metabolic dysfunction, or maybe I have this family history of heart disease. What are the strains or what is this cocktail that's going to work best for me? And I think that that's important for us to think about because we can't take everything under the sun. And actually the idea of like rotating probiotics is actually a myth that's been dispelled. Deidre, you're shaking your head too. We know that it's more about, are we providing the right strains that we know are doing what we need to do and what we're looking to optimize?
And providing a little bit of diversity too. And you can
Yep.
couple probiotics and things
Yep.
like that. Like we have trillions of bugs. It would make sense we could add trillions of things
Yep.
to really make that diversity happen. So depending on your gut test, Kim, we can make such a great plan for you.
And the other thing too
Between
is we can't get all of the really important bugs in, say, just fermented foods. Or so that's the other thing is like something like Akkermansia, you're not getting from food. You're not getting and because it's such an important strain that often goes missing, there's no other way to really support that growth. Again, aside from changing your diet and changing all the things that we know disrupt the microbiome. So I agree, like diversity is one of the key characteristics. And so we really want to work on improving that.
kimchi is fermented, isn't it?
Hmm.
So I found a new way because this is my 10th day of a detox, final day of my detox. And we discovered through this detox, you can actually mix in kimchi with and make a kimchi egg scramble with mushrooms and spinach and just a little bit of, we didn't even use actually, but you could, sometimes I put a little Parmesan on it, but it was absolutely, I don't like plain kimchi, but this was
Oh.
unbelievably delicious with lots of textures. So now I'm addicted. I just went and bought more kimchi. I couldn't believe I did that.
I
So
love kimchi. That's awesome.
we have, and Joshua, who is our YouTube producer here, says he loves kimchi as well.
Yeah.
Kim, go ahead and unmute and ask registered dietitian Kiera your question.
Yes, hi. I was just wondering, are there any contradictions with taking probiotics and medications?
So I always say you need to, speak to your healthcare provider, but in general, probiotics are very safe. But I always say, depending on which ones you're taking, always make sure you tell your providers and who you're working with what you are taking. And just keep in mind, sometimes when we start probiotics, we can feel something shifting, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But generally speaking, probiotics are safe.
Fantastic. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. Any other questions from our live studio audience? I want to give a shout out to Tom, who is joining us on YouTube, and he's been here for several of our episodes. So it's really nice to have him there watching on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, don't forget right below, make sure you do like the video and go ahead and subscribe to the channel to continue to get notified when we have new episodes of Ask a Nurse Practitioner with nurse practitioner Deidre Arms. That is absolutely important. Get your questions answered. I mean, every question gets answered in our sessions. So don't forget to join us, right, Deidre?
Right. We love the questions too. It's actually what helps us build these episodes and what is important to you and what you want to know.
Yep. And just so we have a good takeaway summary, we had Heinz that was here earlier, and he said, yes, there were a lot of technical terms and things like that. And what I appreciate is that you do share the technical terms, and we do have the choice to go look them up, but you not only shared the technical terms, but you did break it down for us. If you wouldn't mind, just in summary, give us the takeaways for Akkermansia. And I also want to know, is Pendulum the only one to get it, or how, if we're going on there and they don't go to Pendulum and they're on Amazon and they're looking around, what do they need to know about the good, the bad, the ugly, when it comes to these supplements, these probiotics? Because there are a lot of claims. And when you end up, for example, looking for fish oil, if you buy it off the store shelves, guaranteed, I've heard it's rancid. So you have to be careful where they're sourcing things. I just heard that, for example, with vitamin C, that there are some supplement companies that supposedly get it from corn. They're not using the real oranges and lemons and all the other fruits out there to get this vitamin C. So how do we know that we're getting the good stuff?
That's a great question. So first, the takeaways, and I did use technical terms, so hopefully we broke it down enough. But I think it's important to hear, what these things are actually called and what's actually going on. So to summarize, right, Akkermansia muciniphila, it's a mucin-loving microbe. It's a keystone strain, right? It's one of those star players of your sports team that has such a profound influence on not just the health of the microbiome, but also beyond the microbiome. And I think that's a huge takeaway here, is that our microbiome is linked to just about every body system and every organ system of the body. And so if we don't start to take care of our microbiome, then we are potentially going to start to see the downward shifts in our health. And so I think it's really important that no matter how well we eat, no matter our sleep, that we have to consider this our foundation. And Akkermansia is key because of its ability to help maintain and support that gut barrier, which is your security perimeter that keeps everything in your microbiome, protects it from getting into your immune system. But Akkermansia is also really important when it comes to our metabolic health, in preventing bacteria from getting into systemic, or bacteria toxins from getting into systemic circulation, that we know is a driver for low-grade chronic inflammation, heart disease, diabetes, obesity. And then the second part of your question is loaded. I mean, it's hard. There's a lot of companies out there, and we are, so Pendulum, and you can go to our website at pendulumlife.com. But we are actually one of the first companies to bring live Akkermansia to the market. And what I love so much about this company, being founded by scientists, is that we actually control the process from start to finish. So we manufacture our own strains, we do third-party testing, quality control. And I think it's really important when you go to look to a company, to your point, fish oils and vitamin C's, what research do they have on their finished product? And I say finished product because you can buy ingredients and you can put it into a capsule, but then what is the product doing together? Is it viable? And I think that's so important. We should be challenging and holding companies up to this standard. So number one, do they have any finished product research on their actual supplements? It's not just for probiotics. I think this extends to other supplements as well. What third-party testing are they doing, to show that quality? Reach out to the company and ask questions. If they don't get back to you, to me, that's a red flag. So I think these are all very specific ways. I don't think you necessarily have to buy the most expensive one or the one that has the most in there. That doesn't necessarily equate to the best. But again, look to those key things as far as testing and certifications or any, actual research that they're citing on their website. Go to the websites, look at what kind of science they're putting on behind their products, because we want to really challenge that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Nurse practitioner Deidre, any final thoughts?
No, I'm loving this episode, as you know, and we are going to get Kim to test her microbiome, and we're just going to put it out there for everyone too.
Yeah, let's see what your poop shows.
It has been months. I keep procrastinating. Even Blue Cross Blue Shield of California has sent me my colon cancer screening, my Cologuard,
Yeah.
and I haven't done that yet. Some people have the fetish with their eyes. I have other fetishes. And so I'm just kidding. But yeah, I'm procrastinating. So yes, at some point, and maybe we'll have to have Kiera back when I finally do, because that will be like pigs are flying. So it's going to be like a miracle when that happens.
Yeah, we could dig deep in it, no pun intended. So
give you both my results. It'd be really funny to see what you guys do. As long as there's solutions, I don't mind. So we can dig as deep.
Right? That's the beauty behind the microbiome, is there are solutions, and there's empowerment behind that.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. As always, nurse practitioner Deidre, you can follow her on YouTube and check out all our videos at youtube.com/@NPDeidre. And you can also go to pendulumlife.com for more on these probiotics and Akkermansia and several more, and all the strains and all the research and that jazz. And Kiera, do you have social media where we can all follow you on social media as well?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. I'm also on Instagram. I'm just not a huge social media person. So do look me up on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram, Kiera Siedman, the only one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate you being here. A deep appreciation. Thank you to Kiera and also nurse practitioner Deidre. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channels, and join us again next week.